Hi everybody! We hope you are still enjoying the Haskell course. Blair and I are here today to have a little bit of a conversation about the kind of things that have been cropping up over the last few weeks, problems you might have been having, interesting comments you've made, and to try and give you some feedback about the way we think the course has been going. So maybe one of the first things we could talk about is parsing, because I know a lot of people last week had some difficulty looking at the parsing material and thought it was a bit of a step change in difficulty from what we'd studied before.
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons that we did this was in order to sort of get you to see what a sort of real Haskell program looks like. So Haskell is really popular for building sort of domain-specific languages and parsing things coming off the web and parsing your own language. So it was sort of to get you to the level that if you went away to look at other libraries, you should kind of know enough Haskell by now that you can look at other libraries. And if you saw these sorts of parsers and sort of more monadic style code, just that you'd have a sort of feel for it. So that's the main reason for that step up.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the slightly intimidating things might have been that we're still using these do constructs without having fully explained the mechanics underneath them. And for that, you'll need to wait till next week when we talk a little bit more in detail about monads and how they work and how they're exposed in Haskell. There was a lovely comment on one of the forums, I can't remember who said it now, but they said something like, if you keep on mumbling about monads, I won't be scared of them when you finally introduce them in chapter 6. But I think...
yes, well, yeah. So Simon Peyton-Jones, who you'll have seen the interview with, he always said that, Haskell's biggest mistake was calling them monads instead of warm fuzzy things.
Yeah, good.
So always, whenever you hear the monad word, just think warm fuzzy thing, and you'll be fine. Parsers
are larger programs than things we looked at before, and I think the fact that the programs have increased in size might have been a little bit alarming to some of you as well, but I don't think you should be worried about that. Haskell's nicely modular. I mean, everything's broken down into small functions, and then the functions are grouped together into modules, as you'll have seen, and you can understand things either top down or bottom up, and we've very much been exploring a sort of bottom up approach to program development, haven't we, Blair?
Yeah, so you'll have seen that again with the parsers, how you take two smaller parsers, you end up with a bigger parser. So something parses a string, something parses a character for a tag, and you've got something that parses XML essentially. So it's all about, so that's kind of bottom-up approach. Lots of small things and they're combined to something big.
Yeah, that's nice.
But then there is, again, top-down approaches. So when you read a lot of documentation, it will give you the kind of higher level. What we actually do is we parse JSON or something like that, and then it's not until you kind of look into the code that you start seeing the parser underneath.
The kind of underlying details. Yeah. Good. Let's talk quickly about libraries in general. So parsing was facilitated by the Parsec library, okay, and some of you had to install that via Cabal, I think, because it wasn't in your minimal GHC installs. But there are loads of Haskell libraries out there. Blair, how would people go about finding Haskell libraries to do other stuff apart from parsing?
Yeah, so the main repository of Haskell libraries, as it were, is a hackage, which you can find online. We'll put a link here somewhere.
Yes.
There's also now Stackage, which is essentially a mirrored version of that if you're using the Stack tool, and it just provides long-term support. So it says this collection of packages will all work together. So there's not a big difference between those two, sort of from your perspective. Some of the main libraries you'll see are things like vector, text, and byte string. So vector sort of provides dynamic lists, as it were, but an efficient implementation using sort of arrays underneath. And text and byte string are sort of a different way of doing strings. So the big problem with strings is it's a linked list, so it's quite slow for heavy text processing. So you'll see that quite often.
One of the libraries I've been looking at is to do web scraping. So all I did was I went to Google, I typed in Haskell library web scraping, and the Scalpel library popped up. I don't know if you've looked at that.
I've not seen that one.
Okay,
no.
Well, it seems quite nice. Yeah, good. Okay, great. So another thing I thought we should talk about just while we've got this this opportunity is book recommendations. We interviewed Simon Thompson and asked him about his book recommendations. And at that stage, there were two books that were kind of in production that hadn't been released, so Simon couldn't review them properly. One of them was Graham Hutton's book, Programming in Haskell. And well, you've probably seen Graham's interview last week, and that's a really good book, well recommended. It's quite concise, and the first half just has the basics, and the second half goes into more detail about perhaps the more advanced concepts on the course. And the other book, which we haven't really covered in too much detail, I downloaded it onto my phone last week. It's called Haskell Programming from First Principles by Christopher Allen and Julie Morinuki. It says, pure functional programming without fear or frustration. So this is actually a really nice book. You can't get a paper copy of it yet, but you can, if you go to haskellbook.com, download a kind of early release of the PDF. It's 1,200 pages.
Although it's a lot of examples. So the key part of the book is we have examples that we will show you how to do, again, things like parsing and how these warm fuzzy things work. So.
Yeah, so it does go through things in a lot of detail, and it takes things quite slowly, more slowly than we've had the luxury of doing, I'm afraid. But I'd recommend that if you really want to get into Haskell into some depth and you haven't perhaps had prior functional programming experience. So that's a good book to have a look at.
Yes. Yep.
Last question before we quit for today. Blair, you've now been tutoring on the Haskell course for 5 weeks. You've been answering people's comments and kind of responding to queries and so on. How have you found the course and the experience, the interactions and so on?
It's been great. So the big plus of these kind of online courses, you've got lots of input from lots of people. So just sort of reading the discussions, we asked what sort of differences you see between functional and imperative and what the biggest code bases you worked on. Even seeing those things are great to kind of see how people's minds are changing throughout the course as well. And just being able to engage in that discussion and hopefully help you guys out has been great.
Good. Yeah, absolutely. Let me emphasise what Blair's saying there. I think the most valuable part of the course, from my point of view as well, has been just the interaction between the learning community. And we hope that will be something that will maybe carry on when the course is finished, that this community will, rather than wither away, will maintain itself, and there'll be ongoing interest in Haskell from all you good learners out there.
Yep.
Great. So let's say goodbye.
Yes.
We hope you enjoy the final week next week.
Enjoy.
And it's been a pleasure to teach you.
Yes, right. Goodbye.